Good morning, everybody. Hello, I'm Jenny Usby, the founder of Ovid Health, a health communications agency who specialise in PR, public affairs, campaigns, and of course, patient advocacy. I'm delighted you're all here. Thank you. Welcome to the inaugural Patient Partnership Index Conference. The Index is an initiative which benchmarks best practice by pharmaceutical companies in their comms and advocacy work with patient communities. As chair of the judges this year, I was really impressed by the quality of entries, and you'll hear from some of our gold and silver winners shortly. There are about 150 of you who've registered to attend today, logging on and eating your breakfast. So I hope to set you up for the day and leave you inspired and invigorated, because there are some really great speakers this morning in our quickfire panel sessions. The Index is a result of many conversations in the months before we knew the word coronavirus. It was a meeting of minds with the editor of Pharma Times, Selina McKee, who also, like us, believes passionately in getting patient partnerships right for the pharmaceutical sector. My personal drive in setting up the Index was founded in years of seeing how comms and advocacy can achieve so much internally and externally, but also how it could be so much better. Ovid Health is in a unique position to drive this conversation forwards and create the Index, because our agency's purpose, like yours, is to increase the number of people living healthier lives. In the past few months alone, we've supported charities to win access to medicines for patients, secured policy change for clients. We're also not afraid to go big or go home, and have battled a pandemic and homeschooling along the way to pull off both the Index and this morning's conference. So looking at the attendee list, I have to admit, I did feel a pang of sadness at not being able to see you all together in a room, imagining the energy that would create. But without the power of virtual, we probably wouldn't have been able to get you all to London. So I'll take that. So instead, please do take part in the conversation online via our hashtag on LinkedIn or Twitter, hashtag Patient Index 2020, during the conference and after. And finally, look out for our forthcoming Insights report, which will contain lots of practical advice and examples of patient communications and advocacy. So our keynote speaker for our Q&A today is also someone who believes in the power of patient partnerships. Jess Mills is the founder and CEO of the Tessa Jowell Foundation and co-founder and leading member of the Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission. Jess's inspirational mum, Baroness Tessa Jowell, memorably stood up in the House of Lords when she was terminally ill with brain cancer and made a speech. In that speech, she said we could all be part of the human-sized picture. I think the Index is a contribution to this human-sized picture. So without further ado, I'll kick off with my first question. Good morning, Jess.
Good morning.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. So we're all really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So to begin with, could you tell me a little bit about your journey to patient engagement and kind of what and who inspired you?
Oh God, so my journey to patient engagement very much came as a result of the experience of being a patient and family suddenly thrown onto the very, very scary and difficult front lines of what it is to be a patient, living with a currently untreatable form of cancer. And of course, that was my dear mum, Tessa Jowell. And so, you know, everything that I have learned, everything that I now am, you know, very much charging into the world through the work that we're doing through the foundation and as part of the Brain Cancer Mission, has been informed by the very, very real experience of what it is to be a patient and what those needs are.
And tell me a little bit, because some people may know at the conference, some people might not, but you have quite an unusual journey to being here today. So, you know, you are, I think, a multi-hyphenate. You do lots of other things as well, and come from a background where you've worked in both kind of refugee action, you're a musician, you have your podcast. So tell me a bit about, because I'm quite interested, it's quite unusual for somebody in a relatively short space of time to make such an impact in patient engagement. So how did you adapt to that transition? And, you know, was forging relationships a big part of that? And what else influenced it?
So yeah, I think you could definitely say I do not have what you consider to be a kind of orthodox.
Yeah, classic CV.
Yeah, classic CV. I don't even know if I have a CV. No, honestly, I mean, I've just, you know, the work that I've come to, particularly in the campaign space, has very come about as a kind of mission-led sense of purpose. You know, so the work that I did, I'm a founding member of an organisation called Help Refugees, which you may know better now as Choose Love. You might know our very, very lovely t-shirts. And I became involved in Help Refugees very, very, very early on in a way that lots of people did just within civil society, seeing the kind of horrific events that were unraveling in Europe. And just, I turned up in Calais basically just wanting to just do anything that I could do to help, and became connected with the extraordinary group of women that were forming Help Refugees at the time. And none of us had any experience of the sector whatsoever. We actually all came from music, or someone else is a radio DJ, someone else is working cold place management. I mean, none of us had any experience in the humanitarian sector at all, but I think what we did have was very good transferable skills. I think we were very tenacious. I think we all had an innate sense of kind of mission-led purpose. And we also, you know, I think it's incredible what these very challenging times can reveal, and what we're capable of. And I think at the heart of what we do, I'm still a director of Choose Love. The heart of what we do is the humanity. You know, we have a very, very daily granular connection to the communities and the people that we serve. And I think that is a huge part of what's enabled us to thrive and to do the incredibly impactful work that we have. And I mean, everything that I'm saying here, I hope will kind of translate to, well, definitely to the way that my mum lived her life, and the way that my mum engaged in public service. And, you know, all of those values of mum's legacy, we are absolutely part of the DNA of the Tessa Jowell Foundation, which we've recently founded, and also as part of the leadership that I bring to the Brain Cancer Mission, which was founded by the Department of Health in response to the very brilliant speech that you referenced. There's a kind of commitment to their legacy to see through the changes that she had outlined in that speech.
And you talked about, you know, how you talked about tenacity there, and talked about how in challenging times that can sometimes bring out the best in people, I suppose, as well as the worst in people. And one of the things that we've been reflecting on in creating the index and thinking about patient partnerships is, you know, it's inevitably in the context of the pandemic, and particularly in terms of the tough times that some healthcare charities are currently facing in terms of fundraising, and actually thinking about it in the sense that partnerships are, you know, good partnerships are more vital than ever. You know, do you think that in this period, with your kind of charity hat on, also presents some opportunities for charities to try and forge, I don't know, different types of partnerships to get their message across?
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to in that, Jenny, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. And I think, you know, we have to just go back to thinking about what the purpose of partnerships are. You know, what are the purpose of good partnerships? You know, I know, and I see this, you know, every day in the work we're doing at the foundation now, in the Brain Cancer Mission, and then still from a kind of one step removed, which I am from Choose Love, but from a kind of director's perspective there, that, you know, good partnerships, real partnerships which are developed through a true alignment of values and mission-led purpose, have the ability to drive the most extraordinary change in the world. And And I see that every single day. And I suppose what's important from the perspective of pharma is thinking about, getting back to this point of, what is the purpose of our partnerships, and how, I don't think partnerships when they are good and where they are true and when they are authentic are never just a box ticking exercise. They are there because they somehow help you, they somehow connect you more profoundly or cause. And I, Mum was absolutely brilliant on this. As she's the first ever public health minister ever, and her strong kind of belief system was that you can never make impactful public health policy from behind the comfort of your ministerial desk. You have to be out there breathing the same oxygen. You have to have, you have to have the dirt under your fingers of the world which you are trying to change. And she was famously quoted when she was developing Sure Start, which some of you may know was one of the kind of most transformational early years programs that was designed and delivered by Mum. And she would often say, I always need to be able to smell the babies. And
babies generally.
But the point is, you should never ever your partnerships, the work you're trying to deliver should never be done from a sanitized perspective. And the other thing that she would say is that whilst you can get you can probably get 50% of a picture from a report you receive on your desk. One of the very, very transformational things she did early on in her career in public health before she became a politician was trying to transform the kind of the living conditions of elderly people and old people's home in the Midlands. And she said, nothing can tell you about the permanent stench of urine in certain parts of the, if the tea room that you otherwise wouldn't know had you not gone to spend time there. And so Mum would go and spend a night at least in every single home that she was working with in partnership to try and turn around. And that, I think that is incredibly important. I mean, it's something that I take with me always. And just on the cost aspect of this as well, she had been charged with delivering some very, very transformational stuff, but with no money. And she said, the way that you can really identify very low cost but very transformational ways of delivering change is to live and breathe the air that people are living and breathing. And if you're not doing that, then you're just never going to be able to do it in an impactful way.
And thank you. And I really love that bit about the dirt under your fingers. And I think that that's something where, I know that a lot of pharmaceutical companies are really good at getting their employees out and about and, meeting, whether it's healthcare professionals, meeting the patients who are benefit from the medicines and the products that they create. But that's fantastic, because I think that's a real call to action to do even more of that. What do you think in the context of, you gave a really good description of the purpose and what makes a good partnership. How does that link up with what your ambitions are for the Tessa Jowell Foundation in terms of what you want it to achieve? Because I know you're very ambitious about it.
Oh, well, it's absolutely the kind of founding DNA of who we are. And, we are, the Tessa Jowell Foundation has been founded to deliver mums career-defining legacies in public health. However, we are learning all the time about the kind of less visible but equally powerful aspects of her legacy. And one of them is around the power of collaboration. And it was something that she harnessed in absolutely everything that she did, an ability to unite very diverse groups and stakeholders of people behind a common purpose, united by purpose, united by values. And, there is just the most extraordinary evidence in her life of the impact that can have. The Olympics, which was the Sure Start being another, which was the first ever public health initiative to span the Department of Health, the Department of Education and the Department of Employment. And the Olympics, where there was a cross-party team of people leading it. She very controversially appointed Seb Coe as a leader who was a Tory, but she was brilliantly untribal when it came down to just how to get a job done. And I think being having that openness can allow for, you know, extraordinary kind of maybe undiscovered potentials to reveal themselves in what you do. And so, you know, the first thing that we're doing at the foundation is to deliver on mum's legacy in brain cancer treatment and care reform throughout the National Health Service, as a leading member of the Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission. The Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission is, I mean, it is an extended partnership in the most truest sense. The Brain Cancer Mission is a convening body of 50 different stakeholders who have all come together in the last 2.5 years to unite behind building a truly transformational national strategy for how we can treat and care for brain tumour patients throughout the NHS, you know, with the very clear ambition to make the UK the #1 place in the world to treat and care for brain tumour patients, very much as a roadmap for how we can then innovate treatment and care for other cancer types beyond.
Amazing, and I love the way you don't shy away from having that ambition, and I think that and you rightly have that ambition, I think, because even in a relatively short space of time in the kind of healthcare sector, I think you and people around you have achieved so much change when it comes to patient advocacy in brain cancer in particular, in terms of delivering your mum's legacy. Could you give me an example, I don't know, one which you're proud of in the last, you know, year or so, in terms of what change has come about through the partnerships, through the patient advocacy that you've been involved in?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll just say to that, Jenny, is thank you. And another thing that my dear brilliant mum would often say, you know, it's all very good having a vision, but a vision means absolutely nothing if it can't be transferred into actionable change. And so at the foundation, you know, that is very much a kind of North Star of our thinking. You know, how can we translate blue sky ambition into real bricks and mortar? And so, you know, we're not just here to talk about change or to advocate on the behalf of it. We're very much here to enable it and to develop it and to deliver it. And so the way in which we are doing that right now is through, well, we announced earlier this summer, and it's going to be rolling out extensively from the beginning of next year, is our Tessa Jowell Centres of Excellence initiative, which I am bursting with pride about, which will create the first ever national network for excellence in brain tumour care and delivery throughout the National Health Service, which will bring the first ever precision medicine clinics to the National Health Service. The Tessa Jowell Fellows, the Tessa Jowell Centres will be host sites to Tessa Jowell Fellows, to Tessa Jowell nurses, to the first ever adaptive treatment trial for brain cancer in the UK, the Tessa Jowell Brain Matrix, which is running out of Birmingham University, which will be a kind of, which will be a centre of excellence too. And so I am hugely proud of that. I think it embodies everything that we do, everything that we believe in, and you know, fundamentally, the TJ centres have at their core a sense of social justice, which is how can we make more equal, truly excellent care and treatment available to all patients, regardless of what their background. And, you know, just going back to what we spoke about at the beginning about, you know, the humanity of these things should always be at the core of what you do. And, you know, the thing that ignites me is seeing patients and families that could have been mine, that could have, you know, God forbid, have not even had the awfulness of this disease land in their lives, but may well in the next couple of years, having the trust and the confidence that they will be able to walk into Tessa Jowell Centre and know that they could not be getting better care or treatment anywhere else in the world. And that, quite honestly, makes me feel very proud indeed.
Thank you. And yeah, and absolutely, you should be. And I think that we are all cheering you on from the sidelines to all of that, and I no doubt you will.
Jenny.
I believe in you. So finally, and sorry, because it's been fascinating, and I'm sure people will get in contact if they want to know more. Why are you proud personally to be involved in the Patient Partnership Index?
Oh, just, you know, for all the reasons that we've described. I think it's, you know, it's part of building, sorry, I keep throwing out little TJF sound bites, but part of the, the human sized picture, and it is about building that human sized picture, and that is at the core of everything that we want to do too. So, I think this is a really important part, of contributing to that, and hence why I feel very proud to be a part of it too.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, Jess. I really, really appreciate it. I think you, I love the fact that you've come on and inspired people. And, we've talked a lot about turning a vision into reality. And I'm sure that everyone listening will feel that kind of sense of passion. So thank you for igniting that at the start of today. Next up is my colleague, Rudy Shaffi, Director at Ovid Health, who'll be moderating our first panel. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you, Jess, for kicking us off in such great style. I am just virtually assembling my panelists while you wait. So our first panel of the day will be on innovation and impact, the lessons and ideas from the Patient Partnership Index 2020. As Jenny said, what began as this crazy idea on a cold and rainy January at the beginning of the year, it's wonderful to see now come to fruition. We couldn't have done it without all of you, our participants who've shared your time with us, who've entered the index, and of course all the panelists that will be shortly joining us. So I will just pause until all our panelists are live, and we will be with you in just a moment. Good morning, everyone. Good morning on panel one. And good morning, all of you at home, probably, or some of you might be lucky enough to be in the office and popping to Pret for lunch. So if I can ask all our panelists to unmute themselves, thank you very much. So I'm delighted you're all here this morning. I will briefly introduce you all to everyone watching. So we have our three judges joining us this morning, Selina McKee, who's the editor of Pharma Times, and our fantastic partner on the Patient Partnership Index, as well as Richard Davidson, CEO of Sarcoma UK, and Jill Piercy, Director of Code Engagement at the ABPI. I'm also delighted to be joined by industry leaders Nicole Farmer, General Manager for UK and Ireland for Sanofi Genzyme, and Giancarlo Notariani, General Manager for UK and Ireland at Intercept Pharma. And today as well, we have their patient partners, David Martin, CEO of the MS Trust, and Robert Mitchell-Thane, Head of Education and Development at the PBC Foundation. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I'm going to kick off by asking our three judges to just give us your headline reflections on the entries you saw this year. So Selina, I'll start with you, and then maybe Richard and Jill.
Good morning, everyone. So from my perspective, I was genuinely impressed and actually a little surprised to see the depth of activity underway to build meaningful partnerships between pharma and patients, as highlighted by the entries. I do think it's a shame that we don't get to hear more about the wonderful work behind the scenes that is increasingly giving patients greater powers as co-creators of healthcare and ultimately blazing a trail for others to follow suit. So from this year's index, which is the first that we ran, we found this year's entrants to be at various stages of their patient partnership journeys, but crucially all had in common the desire to ensure patient involvement in their operations, which was lovely to see. And I'm excited to see what next year's entrants will bring.
I think the thing that struck me, like Selina, was that although lots of different pharma companies were on a journey in terms of their PPI journey, it was kind of clearly very important to most of them. And I think often indicators of success that were throughout were about senior level buy-in, involvement across levels or areas of the company, and patient organizations involved very early on, and often around a principles or charter. So often the pharmaceutical companies had something in common, and the partnerships had something in common, albeit all of them were on different kind of stages of their journey. But it was a really impressive field, I think.
Yes, I would agree. I'd say that there were some fantastic case studies there and so much hard work that had gone in over years. I mean, from my perspective, it was good to see how many were focusing on a long-term relationship rather than just a few transactions. And that was great to see, and to see the transfer of skills that was going on as well as specific activities. You saw patient organizations being involved from the design stage onwards, but I also found that quite a few of the entries were showing flexibility to respond to immediate events. Clearly, COVID has had an impact on what they were doing in their collaborations, and it was great to see that that was still possible, even though there were these long-term arrangements in place.
Thank you, Jill. And we'll certainly come back to that question of COVID in a minute. One of the things that stood out for me, and I think Jess and Jenny were just talking about it now, is this sense of shared purpose. And I know that's something that we've discussed before, Giancarlo, Nicole, and the rest of us. I guess so beyond that, I wanted to ask David and then Nicole, what do you think about beyond purpose, how important is impact?
From my point of view, I think impact is really important, but I'm not sure I've always smelt the appetite for impact in my 2 or 3 years in this space so far. I think you've got the balance, you've got the challenge that faces us all of initiative-itis against the impact that can be achieved. It takes much longer. It takes more than a year to achieve decent impact. And I've not always experienced the appetite for a longer term project that is going to really intensify and measure that impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think following on, David, it was great to listen to Jess. What an amazing introduction. And I think it's fair to say it is a sad fact of life that most of us are going to be impacted either directly or indirectly by the experience of being a patient. And that's no different for everyone who chooses to work for Sanofi. We choose to come to this organisation because we unite around our purpose, around bringing life-changing products to patients. But that's also why we align so well with our patient groups. And in my mind, that gives us that common ground. But the important thing is, on that common ground, what do we then choose to build? And this was a point Jess made as well, around if you don't actually have action, or to David's point, if you have no impact, that shared purpose doesn't do anything. So I think one of the things that's made me really proud of the partnership that we've had with the MS Trust is what that work has actually gone on to achieve. I think for us being able to highlight inequalities in patient care across the UK, people with MS deserve the very best. And I think the one thing I really liked, the impact was around the work that actually supported having MS specific nurses that were provided by the MS Trust. That was a really specific outcome, but we still have one of the lowest treatment rates of people with MS in Europe, and that undoubtedly causes me a huge level of frustration. But just on your point, David, around sort of I think you called it initiative-itis, tracking our impact is absolutely critical to sustain things for the future, because I think if we don't track, we get what I call project drift, and the longer a project drifts, the more patients continue to be disadvantaged. So it's in no one's interests at all that we don't have critical milestones and we track our impact along the way.
So it's very much about balancing both purpose and impact. And Giancarlo and Robert, I mean, there's certainly no shortage of passion from both of you in terms of the work you've done together. You do have a very strong sense of shared purpose. But I guess just to sort of probe a bit harder, and it's fine, we're amongst friends here, we are recording, but still, I guess, who drives the impact? Is it the company or is it the patient organisation?
Do you want me to go first, Robert? Or
please, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think both companies and patient groups do drive impact, but in different ways. So in a way, the company's job's a bit more straightforward, because the way we provide impact is, it's quite simple. We provide the resources in terms of a budget and maybe some logistics or agency support, excuse me, that can really make sure that the activity happens, and maybe some extra expertise and extra level of quality that might bring. But ultimately, I mean, without question, for me, it's the patient group that really, they're the ones that really know what the patient needs. And they're the ones that really ensure that the activity itself delivers on what the patient needs. So for me, it's people like Robert and the PBC Foundation that really provide the most impact when it comes to any project that we do.
Okay, well, thank you, Giancarlo. It means that the myth is working, because for me personally, I don't think it's the patient groups at all. I think it's the actual individual patients. Those are the ones that drive the impact. Those are the ones who have to engage with the project once we put it together. And so right at the very start, at the inception, it has to be patient-led. And when you look at, patient organizations, you've got the noisy one at the front who's banging the drum, waving the flag. You've got the ones that work behind to smooth the waters again and then make the real work happen. But all of this is driven by patient need. And if you tap into that patient need and really listen to what's needed, then that will focus the impact of the project. So for me personally, it's patients. And
David, I can hear you're sort of egging to come in, because I know you've been thinking about impact a lot recently.
Yeah, but the challenge is I don't hear back from, I think the sector is nervous, it's shy about impact really because of the long-term aspect of it. I think there's a real appetite to want to do a lot, to change a lot, but I think my sense is, I admire what Robert is saying, but it's that long tail of patients. I know, I'm sure Nicole would support this, 140,000 people living with multiple sclerosis, but there are the same voices that we hear from time and time again. I came across from the disability sector 3 years ago. The voice of people living with disability was much stronger, much louder, and much more influential there. And I'd like to work with others to see what we can do to turn up that voice in the foreseeable future.
Well, I think you and I have got a lot we can catch up on afterwards.
I think that's a really good point, David. And actually, I wanted to ask both you and Richard, of course, who also runs his own patient organization, how do you create that feedback loop? So both from the patient to yourselves, and then from yourselves back to the partner company, in order of sort of, I guess, to measure their impact. How do you create that feedback loop? What's the magic formula? Richard, why don't you go first?
I'll go first, and I'll talk a little bit about the how we get the feedback from the patients. So we often are talking to the patients. We run a support line, so we talk to them every day, but we also run periodic surveys of all sarcoma patients in the UK. So we get an awful lot of feedback, and those are very, very broad, all-encompassing questionnaires and conversations. So that's how we get the feedback from patients. I think in terms of partnerships with the pharmaceutical companies and PPIs, what we are really keen to do is get involved as early as possible, and also make sure that the feedback is ongoing. So it's great if you can have kind of evaluation days or so on, but actually that kind of honest feedback should come throughout the project and over time. So I think that's all kind of really, really important. And I think it's really essential that the metrics and how the project is measured is agreed really early on, and is agreed on both sides, because obviously both partners want the best outcomes and want the best success. So if that's agreed and shared really early on, then it means that there will be a successful, or more chance of there being a successful partnership.
And do you see a direct correlation, and sort of reflecting on throughout your career, between the quality of a partnership and the impact it delivers, and basically both sides' openness to that feedback loop, to reflecting and changing as needed?
Absolutely, and I think that Nicole's comment about project drift, I think, is key. You need to make things fresh, and you need to keep things going. But project drift is only spotted, I suppose, on both sides from organisations having honest, open conversations so that they can spot that and adapt and move on. But yeah, I think that's essential.
And David, you have sort of obviously your own experience both with Sanofi and other partners, as well as sort of, you know, non-commercial partners in other types. Tell me more about how, I guess, how you think the best feedback loops work and how they can generate better partnerships.
My organisation is not as mature as Richard's in a sense that we haven't really developed that sort of constant feedback, that constant testing. So we've played very much on social media over the last couple of years and developing a group of about 14,000 people living with MS across Facebook, a private group, and it's become really powerful, really influential. What we've yet to do is complete the whole circle, because unless what we hear and what we get from those engagements starts to influence our behavior and the behavior of pharma, then we're never going to achieve anything. So we've got to make that more meaningful, but do what we can to turn up that voice across the wider sector. And certainly it's a mission of mine. I'm taking over the chair of the Neurological Alliance next month, and that's certainly that's top of my agenda over the next 4 years.
Great, thank you very much. Now, one of the things I believe drives impact, again, based on my own experience, but also we heard from our judges and also even Jenny and Jess earlier today, is one of the things that drives, I guess, impact is senior level buy-in. It makes all the difference. And that's something we really saw reflected in all our gold companies. So sort of as our senior leaders today, Giancarlo and Nicole, I'd love to hear a bit more about you in terms of how important senior level buy-in is, how have you ensure that your company has it, and maybe what tips you might give to other companies aspiring to be gold winners next year.
Okay, shall I take that first?
Yeah,
I think the fact that you've actually got two general managers here this morning shows how seriously we do take our patient group partnership, and I think that need is growing year on year. Yeah, I've been in the industry over 30 years now, and I see it just becoming increasingly important. We talked about our work obviously with the MS Trust, but you know we've done some work very recently with Allergy UK in the Seeing Red campaign, and I don't know about you guys, but I've heard people recently moaning about, oh, my hands are really dry because I have to keep sanitizing them since we've got to COVID. And I think, yeah, imagine someone with severe eczema. That discomfort you're feeling on your hands, it's 100 times worse, and it covers the whole of your body. So the Seeing Red campaign with Allergy UK had very specific calls to action. It was around addressing the delays in recognition and diagnosis. It was around establishing guidelines, and it was around finding clear patient pathways. So it is something we take so seriously. And I sometimes get asked, you know, are there things that keep me awake at night? Not many things, to be honest. But the thought of patients being lost in our system, you know, I'm a listening volunteer for Samaritans. I hear from people when the pain of living with a long-term medical condition is even worse than the thought of dying. So this is such a real thing, and yeah, I can't emphasize enough how much, I think Jess talked about things being in your DNA. This is very much not just in my DNA, but in all the senior leaders within Sanofi.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with everything Nicole said there. I mean, I think so the reality for me, for example, at Intercept is, yes, I might be the general manager of the UK company, and I might control my budget, but I have to get my budget from someone above me at International. So I think the senior management buy-in is so important, because we need to convince our senior managers that we need to spend money or have budget for this particular area. It's really important that they understand the value of doing these kinds of activities and projects, what they bring to patients. They don't need to necessarily know, you know, when I talk to people in New York about all the details about what they're doing, but they need to understand the value that these partnerships can bring to patients. And ultimately, you know, I genuinely believe as pharma, we have a significant, I guess, corporate responsibility to really do everything beyond simply manufacturing or selling drugs. Anything else we can do to support and improve patient care, you know, we really have to do that. So it's really important senior management buy into these partnerships and understand what they bring.
And Jill, I mean, obviously you're a senior leader in the trade association and therefore work with a whole board of general managers. We have the pleasure of having two, but you sort of have discussion with many, many more. How do you reflect on, I guess, what you're seeing at the moment from senior leaders in terms of their you know, very much not just, and I know they all say patients first, but, you know, are you seeing any sort of real purpose and impact drive?
Well, I think what comes across is that actions matter, and people watch the actions of senior leaders, and you see the ones that are actually stepping up and doing things and involving themselves as, you know, pushing forward the process. They're not just as the figurehead on the project, but they're actively involved in doing those things like getting the international budgets or the process smoothed out or straightened or smoothing out the bumps in the road. So it's not just about being there as a name, it's about really active involvement, and people look at that in organizations and they look at that in collaborations and model their behavior on it. So it's crucial when you're setting the sort of culture and the tone to have the senior people actually stepping up and walking the talk, really.
Thank you. That's really true. So Jill, you mentioned that need to sort of adapt, and you mentioned it again at the beginning in your reflections. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that we're not even in the room and that we're all meeting virtually today because there is a pandemic. It did take everyone somewhat by surprise. And I guess Robert and Nicole, you know, when we were speaking, you both told me some really, I guess, lovely interpretations of, I always say sort of, you know, necessity is the mother of all inventions. So, and you've both shared some things that your organizations have done to adapt and support patients. So I'd like to invite you, Robert, first, and then Nicole to share those examples with everyone today.
Okay, well, thank you. So what did we do? We looked at our comfort zone and thought, how can we jump as far out of our comfort zone as physically possible? So we were in a situation, so we have enormous work in the area of self-management. We're looking at patient empowerment, patient information, and looking at really emotionally, psychologically, and physically living with an incurable condition. And as the lockdown came, we literally had to cancel a 10-day road trip where we had 10 of these workshops already and fully booked down in England. We thought, well, how do we reach these patients that were going to come? So we decided that we would try and reach them through digital manner. So we thought what we would do was have a chit chat, as we called it then. So we decided 4 p.m. every single day, we would on Facebook have a chit chat. Now, it's not a chit chat at all. It is you talking inanely, sometimes rambling, sometimes fighting the technology for an hour and hoping that there's going to be some written feedback coming back to you that you can hopefully latch onto. So we're now down to 6 days a week, but we did 163 of these consecutively. And we played bingo, we did poetry, we looked at who would you invite to dinner. Right in the early days, there was somebody's birthday on a Friday, so we invented Friday Fizz. And even now, the tradition is that every Friday, we get the acoustic guitar out. And to be fair, it's more maim that tune than name that tune. But we have a bash, and people sing along, they dance at home, and it absolutely breaks the isolation. And it's been amazing. And as you say, you know, necessity is the mother. And from that, just that small decision, and, you know, credit to Intercept for reacting quickly in terms of supporting that. And I wanted, if I can, just to go back to the previous question, because I think that senior level buy-in is really, really important. But with Intercept being relatively new and relatively small in the biotech sphere, they're really able to react quickly to those kind of, you know, quick needs. And bring senior buy-in, because they are very responsive and very much listen to the patient need.
Thank you. What a lovely community you created, and I'm sad we don't get to hear your rendition of Hotel California.
Oh, don't be sad. Don't be sad.
Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about this, there were 3 things that I really like that we've done, but I just want to pick up, Robert, on the point you made around, you know, smaller companies are more agile. Sanofi, I don't think, if I'm honest, it's one of its strong points is the ease of engaging with us as an organization. However, what we've learned is actually we can be agile. So I think it's around, it's not survival of the fittest, I think it is survival of the most agile. And we've learned that we can do it. We just need to make sure it becomes a habit. The 3 things that we've really done differently this year, it's an unfortunate fact of life that we saw a number of patients taken off chronic treatments to free up capacity during the pandemic. So what we've done is work with both the healthcare professionals but also the patient advocacy groups to look at how those breaks in their treatment have actually impacted on their lives. So our intention is that we bring those compelling case studies together and actually support the patient groups with really fact-based stories as to why breaks in treatment are not a good idea, and that's obviously with the benefit of hindsight. The second thing is very much, we've all seen the media headlines around the impact that COVID's had on the treatment of people with cancer. So we are working again with patient groups and with healthcare professionals to find what are the alternative routes for infusion treatments, for example. Where else can those people ensure continuity of care in the event they can't access their normal facilities again? So those are great things. And my favourite, because it's really challenged our own constraints that we've put on ourselves, is we've got a whole lot of iPads. They work, but they're not cutting edge. So actually what we found during the pandemic is a lot of patients benefited from virtual engagements with their consultants. However, as it always seems, those people who are disadvantaged already in society continue to be even more disadvantaged when things change. So a number of these patients just didn't have the technology to be able to interact with their healthcare professional during lockdown and be able to have video chats. So we have found a way through a third party, so completely hands off, of actually donating a whole load of iPads to this patient group. They're not even our patients, it's just any person who can't engage with video capability with their consultant, and they'll get to benefit from our donation of iPads. And to me, I just think that's great. It's so simple. It's not just Sanofi Genzyme, it's Pasteur, it's GenMed. We've all joined together, and yeah, and that will be happening at the end of this year.
I think those are just such
amazing.
great examples. Thank you, Nicole. I mean, I think that is such a fantastic example of just sort of getting into that spirit of doing what you can to help, regardless of who the end patient is, because actually it was a need in the system. Robert, you know, you told us about how sort of quickly your partner pharmaceutical company was able to respond and react, which is great. And we've also heard lots of stories, and you'll hear more on the next panel about, you know, really companies stepping up and trying to adapt and help. And the truth is, it is a difficult time for patient organizations. So again, you know, David and Richard, again, as leaders, I'd like to hear a bit from you about what you think companies could be doing right now to support patient organizations. Are there any examples of best practice? And obviously, without naming names, would you like to share some worst practice?
Well, I would applaud, and particularly I'd like to applaud Sanofi, and it's not just because of Nicole sitting here in the panel at the moment, but for me, there are 2 groups of pharmaceutical companies. There are ones who come to the table, they say they want to listen, and then when you've spoken to maybe 15, 20 minutes, yeah, that's fine, it's fine, but where can we find the innovative project? Now, that's great if you're going to go further and you're going to go deeper, but sometimes if it's going to be a meaningful relationship, I think you don't always have to embrace innovation. Let's think how you can have more impact. And we found, particularly with my contacts at Sanofi, we know there are about 2/3 of people living with multiple sclerosis at the moment that just don't get the support of an MS nurse. There's a huge shortage up and down the country. Now, Sanofi have been great. So rather than say, give us something bright that's shinier than new, let's look at something that makes the most difference, and let's put our money where our mouth is. So, you know, I think it's splitting. Innovation can be great, but it's not always the biggest changer.
And I think I would agree with that to a certain extent. I think, you know, things that have worked, things that have been tried and tested, have worked for a reason. So you shouldn't kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and just go for new things, albeit, you know, just be aware of the project drift and so on. And I'm always struck by a quote. I'm sorry, I don't know who said it, but a ship is safe in harbour, but that's not what ships are for.
Gonna write that one down.
Oh, Richard, I think you've frozen. Well, I think
Hopefully it wasn't the cat.
what a beautiful quote on which to pause for us. David, again, going back to, I guess, to the point as well about how, you know, apart from sort of virtual working, how has your organization or other organizations, in particular, how have their partnerships had to respond to what has happened?
Well, I think everybody's become so reliant on Zoom, so reliant on Teams, and in some ways it's been fantastic. But I've heard from, you know, the majority of neurologists have been telling me this is a wonderful way forward. We can have many more regular conversations with our patients and beneficiaries. Privately, around a third of those neurologists are saying to me, "Can't wait to get back to normal when we go to face." And it's much the same with the patients. The patients are loving it, because they're feeling they're getting more access to their neurologists and their patients. But again, there's about a quarter of patients who are telling us they don't like the intrusion into their own homes. So we've got this dilemma as we come out of this current situation, as we move towards the new normal, how can we embrace what has been good about this past 6 months, but maybe set aside one or two of those hurdles?
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So, I mean, I did have another question, because I like this point about sort of, you know, was it the ship is safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are for. You know, we don't want project drift, but we don't always want to do something new. I guess as a journalist, Selina, I would love to hear, and so would our attendees today, about what is it you're looking for, you know, when you get a story, and what makes you go, wow, that's new, that is different, or that's innovative?
Well, first I'd like to say we really don't hear very much at all about what's going on in this area, and you know, from my perspective, I'd definitely like to hear more about it, and to report on it in our various channels. But I think generally speaking, I think, you know, any innovations that, you know, ensure patient-centric partnerships have a really lasting impact, and you know, through new and creative means of gathering insights and seeing pharma and patient groups and the NHS work together on solutions, and essentially measuring success is key. But I think in particular, I'd be interested, and I'd like to see more innovative ways of engaging patients at the earliest stages of drug research, and pulling this through the entire drug development pathway, and actually hearing about it along the way. And I think, you know, we've been talking about coronavirus, given that this coronavirus-induced acceleration in digital care, you know, I realise there is a bit of a double-edged sword, but I'd like to see companies really sort of, and hear about it, making the most of the tech opportunities on offer, which are helping patients, carers and their family to really fully use their powers to shape future healthcare. And I know we've touched on this before, but I think key to future progress in the field will be finding new creative ways to share best practice, including through the media. I know I'd certainly like to hear more about it.
Thank you. And Giancarlo, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a couple of things. I think the first thing to say is, I really agree with what David was saying there, that actually innovation can be more about adapting ideas that have perhaps worked in the past, but could be made to work a lot better if you think about doing them slightly differently. And I think that's super important. Innovation isn't just about necessarily creating something whole cloth and doing something that's never been done before. It's actually often about just improving iteratively things that really do work. The other thing about innovation, I think that sometimes is a bit of a challenge if you're in the pharmaceutical side, is there's sometimes some nervousness about different ideas, because we're a highly regulated industry. We've got obviously the ABPI, Code of Compliance, legal restrictions. And so sometimes when we come up with ideas that can be fantastic ideas from patient groups, from a compliance perspective, it makes us a little bit nervous. So I think within the pharma industry, we've got to be maybe just a bit braver and look at these things in a slightly different way, and maybe not have immediate concerns about certain things that we think, well, is that compliant, isn't it? We can make it work one way or another if we're brave and we're doing it for the right reason and we're transparent in what we're doing. I think we can be even more innovative with accepting some of these ideas that we get.
Well, I mean, Jill, right of reply, is the ABPI code a barrier to innovation?
Well, actually, I couldn't agree more with what Giancarlo just said. You have to focus on the objective and what you're trying to do and not just think about a specific technique or action. And I think you can look at the case studies in the Patient Partnership Index, and they're all very innovative and they show that compliance isn't a barrier. But so often you do hear people saying, oh, I can't do this because of the code. I can't do this because of the compliance. And I would challenge that, because I think there's an assumption there that you can't do it. And I think the trick is to actually really focus on the objectives. What are you trying to do? Are you really following the principles of a good relationship and making sure that independence is protected? Are you being very, very clear? If you don't want to do a project, are you being honest about why you don't want to do it? Or are you just scapegoating the code? Which I'll put that out there. Perhaps that might be a case in some situations. And I think that it's so important to maintain trust in these relationships and in these activities. And you've got to be clear about the objectives, why you're doing something, protecting the integrity of your partners and that's what compliance is there for. But I think that another point to consider, is it innovation for innovation's sake, or are you just really, really focusing on something that's actually going to improve patients' lives? So get back to the objectives and work with compliance early on, so that you're having that discussion about, well, what are you trying to do in this activity, rather than does this follow the rules or not? Are you doing the right thing there? That's the crucial point.
And Jill, one of the things I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you talk about when I used to work with you was that, of course, pharmaceutical companies have compliance departments that can help with all this. Patient organizations don't always have the same amount of resource. So can you tell me a bit about the work you're leading to ensure that they're also comfortable with the sort of the reality of the code as opposed to the fake news?
Yeah, I think that's really true. As customers of the code, really, I think patient organizations are in a very challenging position, because they don't have the facility to handle and review massive legal documents. And there's a lot of good work that's going on at the European level as well, to look at reasonable agreements, for example, to actually make sure that plain language is used. We've produced some guides, there's lots and lots of advice out there, but so we produced a source book to actually bring all that together to kind of help tease out what are the key points about what you have to do or not do in compliance. But I think that the onus should be on companies to make things as simple and as clear as possible, and to recognize that other partners might not have the facility or the time or the resource to actually go through things in massive amounts of detail. And I'm always in favor of plain English and using that to actually draw out what you mean. It helps you to understand whether or not you're actually clear about your objectives, rather than just sort of using a lot of language which sort of talks around them, but rather than saying them directly.
That's fantastic. Thank you. What a great reply. Richard, welcome back. So I wanted to ask you, actually, because one of the conversations we had as a judge, one of your reflections was actually the best entries were very good because of how they used governance to actually improve and support the project, as opposed to as a hindrance or something that slows it down. Could you share that reflection with everyone?
Yeah, I think that some of the entrants were definitely, it felt a little bit as if they were bogged down in the governance and bogged down by the code, and so they were stymied somehow. And I think the ones that really stood out for me were the ones that took it and obviously abided by it, but didn't kind of get tied up in too much bureaucracy, too many checks and balances. And I think Jill's perfectly kind of explained that it should be there to make partnerships grow and flourish. One of the other things that really struck me about the entries that I just wanted to mention in case we lose the point, and that is that sometimes the partnerships reached out to patients that weren't represented by the individual charities, which was something that was really strong. So those charities and pharmaceutical companies that tried to reach out to the disadvantaged, to the people who were voiceless or forgotten or excluded, and tried to bring those in. There was a couple of really good examples of where that happened, and there was something quite powerful about that, I think.
Great, thank you very much. So we only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to actually invite you all, and I will call your name in order, to just share with us a little personal reflection in terms of, you know, the project and the case study you entered into the index, to other partnerships you've had, and you know, what was the personal impact they had? What did you, as a leader, as a person, sort of take away from it and grow from? And Giancarlo, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think from me, probably what I've kind of learned from working with Robert, and especially on what the recent work we've done with Robert, is the impact you can have with really limited budget and resources. So, you know, Intercept's a really small company. I think there are 14 people in the UK affiliate in its entirety, including field team, with a small budget. And likewise, PBC Foundation, I mean, you know, Robert, is it 6 people I think you've got? Again, a small patient group. And yet, despite that, the scale of what we've been able to achieve together for patients and the impact of patients really has been really big. So for my reflection is that you don't need to have necessarily a lot of budget and a lot of resource to have a big impact.
Thank you. Robert, would you like to reflect on sort of personally, what has the relationship with Giancarlo and Intercept meant?
It's always, it's huge. Intercept are, you know, really new, and even when they started, the first conversation we ever had with Intercept, it was, we think we have a compound that can make a difference, but before we talk about that, what do patients need? What are they saying to us? And we kind of looked at each other and we thought, okay, and there's a bit of skepticism, and then they come back and they say, well, actually, we do think this is going to work, but before we do anything about that, what do patients need? What are they saying? And this has been the ongoing conversation every single year, every single meeting. And it's really, really affirming. When you have a rare disease, you feel isolated, you feel alone, you wonder who cares. And the Know Your Numbers video was hugely impactful because it was a reminder to patients that actually they need to be self-managing, looking after themselves and advocating for themselves. But it was a reminder to us that actually getting the basic information out there to then allow patients to empower themselves was absolutely key. So I think the biggest takeaway from me is that, yes, it's a hugely strong partnership, but you actually sometimes just need to focus on getting the basics out there.
Yeah, thank you. And Nicole, you've already shared with us, you know, sort of your personal reflections and answered the question, but was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of, you know, your partnership with the MS Trust and what you took away from that personally or professionally?
Sure, I think so. To be transparent, I didn't work on the project directly, but I think for me it's about understanding all good partnerships rely on long-term, and David, you mentioned this, long-term relationships. And I think what you see and what I see with Sanofi is I'm not unique. You know, we're all there. We all operate off a very consistent value base. So a relationship with Sanofi will apply to whoever happens to be general manager. And it's that consistency of values that enables us to build those trust-based relationships. And through trust, you then get high performance. And I think that's what we've built. I have no doubt that's what we'll continue to build because of our absolute passion for changing the lives of patients.
And David, you know, earlier when Nicole was talking about the MS nurses, I saw sort of your face light up and smile. I mean, was that a project that sort of you personally felt an emotional attachment to?
Absolutely, but it was only because Sanofi were listening to us properly. So we've had a number of times where they've sat at the table, they've listened and they've understood. And that's where, again, I wasn't involved at the start of our project, but I came in the last year or so. And because it was a meaningful conversation at the start, it meant that rather than having something that was bright and shiny and absolutely new, it went back to some of the basics. So of course we've won this award, fantastic, and hopefully it's encouraged people to engage more with patients moving forward. But one of the things it has done in the MS space is some of the learnings from our project, within a year of the project, I was invited to become part of an NHS group creating a new pathway for people living with MS. So some of the learnings from our project have actually influenced that NHS pathway. So that's the difference it can make. So having poo-pooed impact earlier, that's a real result of something that can take place. Sometimes you need a little bit of good fortune, but actually you need true collaboration at the beginning of the project.
But how fantastic. What a great way to sort of wrap up those examples. And Jill, then Celine and Richard, is there something being, what did you take away personally or professionally from being a judge on the index and spending a summer's day sort of wafting through all the entries? And unfortunately, we weren't able to sort of lubricate you with wine and beer because we were all doing it in our living rooms. But Jill,
well, I was really encouraged. I thought there were so many great projects out there, and the long-term impact, that's true, but also the minute level of detail and focus, the care that was taken about the details. So having an impact is not necessarily the big creative innovative project. It would be the very, very small steps along the way that really think about what the impact is on patients, and that came across through the case studies.
Yeah, I'd echo what Jill's saying there, and also it's just really heartening to read about all the positive things that are going on, and it's nice to actually read about like Jill said, the impact on patients. We write so much about specific stages of drug development and pharmaceutical companies and their businesses, but to actually read and understand the outcome at the end of the pathway is lovely to see. So.
And I think the whole experience of doing it during COVID was quite interesting, because you had real live examples of how companies and charities had responded to the pandemic in a really positive, proactive way. And so it was a really nice, weirdly nice time to be doing it too.
Great. Well, it leaves me to then thank you all for not just your time today, but the time you've taken to share your learning and best practice with us at Ovid Health and at the Patient Partnership Index. So thank you very much. To our attendees, the discussion to come is equally as rich and engaging. So please do stay with us as I hand over to my colleague, Rachel Gonzaga. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rudy. Really interesting discussion there. I'm Rachel Gonzaga, Associate Director at Ovid Health. And as Rudy mentioned, we're moving into our second panel discussion today, our second and final discussion. As we're waiting for our panel to switch their videos on, I'll just talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss in this session. So we're covering engagement and empowerment, how to create partnerships of equals. And when we talk about engagement in terms of these relationships between patient groups and pharma companies, we often think about engaging patients and listening to the patient voice. We're also going to be talking about engagement within an organization and how you get that real engagement with patient advocacy from the most senior level throughout the whole company. On empowerment, we're talking about how partnerships should be geared towards empowering patient groups to really serve their communities and moving it beyond just a transactional relationship. So we'll just give it another few minutes before we introduce our panel and kick off that discussion. Great. So let me welcome our panel for this discussion. Firstly, we've got Dr. Lena Sathia, Director of HIV Medical Affairs for UK and Ireland at Gilead Sciences. Dennis Onyango, Programmes Director for the Africa Advocacy Foundation. Dr. Natalie Bohm from Pfizer UK, she's the Medical Affairs Lead there. Dr. Ron Daniels, Founder and Executive Director of the UK Sepsis Trust. Amanda Cunnington, Director of Health Economics and Market Access at Janssen. Sarah Sleet, Chief Executive at Crohn's and Colitis UK. And last but not least, Jenny Ousby, our Managing Director at Ovid Health, who was also a judge for the 2020 index. So let me kick off by speaking to Dennis about the Treating Me Right campaign, which was featured in Gilead's submission to the index. It's a really interesting campaign. Can you tell us a bit about the campaign and what was done specifically right at the start to make sure that this partnership was one that was equal?
So thank you, Rachel, for this opportunity to discuss and share our story regarding our work, our partnership with Gilead Sciences. As you know, our Black communities really suffer poor health outcomes. It's no secret, and a lot of health inequalities. And specifically with HIV, we see a lot of late diagnosis, people who are getting lost to follow up. And so, we thought about what we could do. Of course, we know that our patient groups, specifically those ones we work with, are less informed about their conditions. They don't engage usually as other groups of patients with their clinicians. There was a study that was done which was showing that only 47% are able to ask questions about their condition as compared to non-Black patients. And so, and this occasion, this is like, the reason for this is that there are several barriers that are related to language, literacy levels, health-seeking behavior. And again, where we come from as Black communities or migrants, for example, always you trust the doctor to say, I have to do everything for you. So, that conversation doesn't always happen. And also, the structural and legal issues around healthcare access, people fearing immigration enforcement, stuff to do with data sharing and confidentiality, and also HIV stigma. So we thought about Treating Me Right, which is very much rooted in the NHS Constitution that says that, you've got the right to seek care that is good for you and to be able to be provided with information to make informed choices about your care. So it was very much a community-driven initiative that was based on the experiences we see day in, day out in our interaction with our patients. And so it was so good that we approached Gilead, and Gilead as a company and as a partner in HIV sector especially, is really very much rooted in the community. I think the team that works with Gilead understand the issues that we experience as patient organizations. And so the conversation was easy. It is something that we asked for support to be able to establish a platform for engagement, to be able to enable patients to ask if they are receiving the right care and how they can actually enhance their voices, given that they're always left behind in terms of treatment. And so we put together this wonderful campaign that was very much giving face to our communities. And as you know, Black African communities, especially as the second largest affected group, don't always come out. Most patients do not actually come out about their HIV status. And so this campaign provided an opportunity for us to be able to engage with a number of patients to talk about their experiences. And so, yeah, it was really a good experience. So many good things came out of it, apart from the fact that it gave face. A lot of patients were able to share their experiences about discussing how they engage with clinicians. We were able to have some very wonderful models of photography, people to feature in posters in clinical settings and in patient groups. And we were able to present at conferences at NIVRA and BIVA. And also it led to a good survey, actually, which we did around shared decision-making that really revealed some statistics around the fact that, for example, 47% of women from Black and ethnic minority communities who are living with HIV between the ages of 45 and 60, do not have information to manage menopause, for example. And, so we found that this campaign really gave us that opportunity.
Great. It's a really great example of kind of having a mutual understanding of the root cause of a problem to then build a campaign on. Lena, let me come to you to build on sort of the background that Dennis has set. So we heard quite a lot in our previous panel discussion about agility and the ability to respond to the pandemic. And I think you've got a really nice example of working with Dennis and the Africa Advocacy Foundation on responding to that pandemic. Can you talk us a bit about, talk us through what you did to respond to the pandemic, and specifically how you feel having patient engagement as an embedded part of your organisation helped you to be agile in this way.
Well, thanks, Rachel. So, I mean, I think that Gilead's been a partner with patient advocacy groups in HIV for over 30 years. So actually the strength of that foundational relationship was very much there. So when COVID hit, patient groups had to shut their doors during lockdown. It was very organic for us to reach out and demonstrate our solidarity and actually invite patient organisations to share their experience with us, tell us the challenges that the people that use their services were experiencing, to enable us to be able to understand how we can partner with them to enable them to adapt their services. So patient groups did get back to us, and the immediacy of the needs for the people using their services were around socioeconomic difficulties such as housing, lack of access to food, social isolation. And these are issues which are highly prevalent in the population of people living with HIV, particularly those from Black ethnicities, issues around mental health. HIV is still massively highly stigmatized. So other issues that were highlighted was actually lots of service users were re-engaging with patient groups, which was really encouraging. But I think that speaks to a lot of the sort of fear and misinformation about some of the issues that are compounded by HIV in the COVID setting. So increased prevalence of comorbidities such as obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, real fear amongst the community about the impact that their HIV positivity might have on their risk of COVID acquisition and sequelae of that. So the other issues that were highlighted is that the patient organisations really wanted to focus on those who weren't digitally enabled. You know, we've seen a adoption of digital means of communicating with patients across the healthcare sector. And there are some people that may not have access to a SIM card, something as simple as that, or thinking about it from a stigma perspective, people living with HIV may not have disclosed their status to close family members that they're living with. So if we would find it exceedingly difficult to engage in a telephone or video consultation. So really thinking about that digital divide and what patient organisations could do to support those patients, to make sure that those existing health inequalities aren't compounded by the changes that we're seeing across the sector during COVID. So the agility piece came in because when we heard about the issues that patient organisations were dealing with, it was the financial constraints that were the biggest barrier initially. So actually we proactively said, anybody that's in recipient of a grant for a different purpose, that could be repurposed to tackle your sort of core funding issues. And globally, we launched Gilead Cares, so a COVID acute relief emergency support fund. And we really tried hard, very, very rapidly to change, to simplify our grant application and approvals processes to enable these groups to access support in whatever that might look like as quickly as possible. And then I think what we did was repurpose one of our campaigns to bring together leaders from across patient advocacy groups, combine that with sort of thought leaders externally to really explore how we could best support them, adapt their services to the changing needs of their patients. So issues such as the digital divide, how can we organise that? We co-developed sort of content capsules to try and dispel some of those myths around HIV and COVID. We talked about the behavioural psychology of people during the crisis and how they could better support people using their services, and also about organisational resilience, which I think is something that you know, we can bring external expertise into these organisations to help them better understand how they can get through the coming situation. So I think you know, that agility is something that patient engagement and putting the patient voice at the centre of everything that we do, whilst we've got well-established, strong relationships, mutual trust and understanding and common goals with these patient organisations, really embedding patient engagement across everyone in our organisation absolutely is an ongoing journey. But I think COVID has sort of been a catalyst to help us become more agile, make our support more easily accessible to those that need it.
And specifically on the emergency response fund, and can you talk us through how you made sure that the purpose of that was to empower patient groups to kind of serve their communities, as opposed to it just being a transaction and providing funding?
Yeah, well, I think that it's just the ease of communication, us opening our doors and saying, let us hear your voice, let's hear what the issues are for you. I think that hopefully came across as being, we don't want to just chuck bucket loads of money at you. We want to be able to understand how we can adapt together to meet the needs of people living with HIV.
Right. Dennis, do you have anything to add to that as well, in terms of how you made sure that empowerment was the ultimate goal when responding to the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we really have to recognize is that during COVID it was quite a very challenging time. So there was an enhanced fear among people we support, especially as they were categorized as being extremely vulnerable to COVID. And so the conversations really was around what was needed. So we found that, normally we run face-to-face patient groups, and all of a sudden that one ended. And as you know, that with a lot of the communities we support, people are living in poverty, they have a lot of issues. So health actually doesn't necessarily rank high up there. And so, being able to at least have this open channel of communication with Gilead enabled us to actually convey some of the direct needs of patients we're working with, and issues around digital exclusion, how people can be supported, how we can empower our peer mentors and volunteers to be able to reach out to people. We always take for granted the fact that if you move services online, then everyone will be able to sign in on Zoom. It's not like that. So there's always the challenge around technology and also stigma. Some people live in households where they don't want their condition to be discussed. So how do you actually navigate that? And I think that, coming from a background of having worked longer with communities, I think it was quite easy for Gilead to be able to open for us the chance to innovate and really draw some practical options that ensure that we did not leave everyone behind, and that we're able to be facilitated enough to for example, ensure that we get SIM cards and data for people, maybe for those who do not have phones, and also maybe to empower volunteers with equipment and data to be able to reach out to others. So I think it was really a good program.
Right. There's some really kind of fantastic kind of practical tips there for our audience to take away. Moving to Ron now, wanted to ask you what overall you feel makes a good partnership between a patient group and a pharma company, and how this has changed with the pandemic. I mean, we know that charity fundraising is a particularly hard hit area at the moment. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and what you feel makes a really good partnership of equals?
Yes, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. So, I mean, really, I want to pick out on a couple of themes here. I mean, we all know that the third sector, the charity sector, certainly in the UK and in other countries, is significantly down on resource at the moment. Various reports between 57% and 80%. So the sector is struggling, but the need for the sector to deliver is, of course, during this pandemic, even greater than ever. I think the second thing I'd like to draw out is something that's already been mentioned, which is around the journey, around the long-term strategy, around a relationship that continues over a long period. And the third thing that Dr. Giancarlo in the previous session mentioned was about being brave. The relationship between the third sector and industry, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, as we know, has historically been sullied. But now is the point that we really need to work together in the greater good. So describing that in our relationship with Pfizer UK, this is absolutely not a purely transactional relationship. This is around working together to deliver a collaborative strategy. And if I can illustrate some examples of this journey, this really started by segmenting the people that we needed to reach out to. And these aren't just our public, our service users. These are prescribers of antimicrobials. These are policymakers in the antimicrobial stewardship space. These are policymakers in the pipeline space. We set out to understand how communication can benefit, because of course, simple communication and disseminating of messaging is a very cost-effective strategy for change. And in the very early days in our relationship with Pfizer, we identified that the reach of Pfizer UK, together with our own reach, could educate a huge number of prescribers and a huge number of service users in a responsible approach to antibiotics. And this was about the patient voice. Now, I'm a clinician, but of course I represent patients in the charity sector, and we had to use patient stories in that messaging. So we worked together on a video. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, mildly quashed our ability to disseminate that message, but what we've been doing is strategizing. So we've held a parliamentary meeting collaboratively with Pfizer UK recently, in which we brought together those policymakers, brought together advocates of antimicrobial stewardship, infection prevention, and rapid sepsis management in the same space. And we're beginning to talk now about influencing policy to consider these 3 pillars of infection management cohesively. And then we're looking to the future, and again, looking at the prescribers, the grassroots health professionals, and we're talking about proposals as to how we can incentivize grassroots organizations, primarily acute trust, but not exclusively acute hospitals, to deliver better improvement methodology, better practices into their prescribing. What we want people to do is to consider time-critical infection and the body's response to it, which is sepsis, as a healthcare emergency. To address that responsibly with respect to antimicrobial resistance, and of course, in high-income countries, to do what we can with vaccination programs and education to prevent infection, and in low and middle-income countries, to work with organizations driving better clean water, sanitation, hygiene, and vaccination programs, so to make healthcare systems resilient. And by doing this together, and this is not just a relationship with a single healthcare entity, I think we need to be brave, and we need to work collaboratively with other organizations who are in the pipeline space and the vaccination space. By doing this, we can begin to address some of the 49 million episodes of sepsis that the world sees every year, and the 11 million deaths with a disproportionate affectation in children under 5 in low and middle income countries. So that's really what this relationship means to us.
That's great. And Natalie, so building on that, so it's clearly easier to be brave from a pharmaceutical company's perspective if patient engagement is truly embedded in your organisation. So can you tell us a bit about how Pfizer UK have done that, and some tips that you can share in making sure that patient engagement is embedded at all levels of the company?
Yes, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Ron, for setting that out so eloquently. And I think, you know, working with Ron, and when we looked at the Patient Partnership Index, it really made us reflect. And I think, you know, it is up to us as an industry. We talk about our patient centricity, how we want to empower patients, but it's really up to us to reflect on what we need to do culturally and from governance structures, which I think one of your previous speakers had mentioned, to enable those relationships to happen, because otherwise we will always end up with that transactional relationships. So speaking sort of from an internal perspective, you know, embedding that in our culture is about empowering our everyone across the organization to be able to understand, reflect, and appreciate the impact of what it is that we do. So those clear governance structures obviously need to be there, and I think the gentleman from Sarcoma UK reflected on that. But I think one of the things that I've really reflected on as well is we talk a lot about listening to people. We talk a lot about patient empowerment. Patient empowerment to me is a funny concept, because I think patients have power. They have the power of their experience, of their conditions, their experience of healthcare systems. It's not up to us to give them power. It's up to us to understand how to listen to them, to help them actually engage the power that they have with the systems that we work with. So in working with someone like Ron, you know, we very much had to, as an organization, really reflect on how we listened. And I think a lot of us come to this with a roadmap in our head of how we want things to work out. And what this pandemic has really taught us, I think, and certainly from a Pfizer perspective, is to let go of your initial, you know, concepts, your outputs, your strategies, to work with your partners to redefine that. But by way of an anecdote, one of the assets we were working on with Ron was this fantastic video around understanding sepsis and awareness of it. And actually that was going to be for us an internal video for some internal education and understanding. And of course, this pandemic hit, and we had to completely rethink about how we're going to use that, because of course all of our internal conferences ceased and what have you. And one of my colleagues in conversation with Ron was talking about, well, what can we do? We spent time developing this together. And Ron said, quite rightly, well, this is a fantastic piece of work. It's great for raising awareness. How can we now transition this to what we need? And so we acted, again, agilely to do that. Because we placed governance structures in place, we could do that compliantly. We could reflect what Ron and the organization needed. So I think for me, the take-home messages from this is really think about how you embed this culturally in your organization. Make sure that you're understanding the impacts that you need internally and externally and measuring those. And make sure that those governance processes are in place so that you can actually action things and work agilely without causing too much delay to your partners.
That's great. That's really interesting. And a question for both of you, and coming back to empowerment, who do you feel should be the main champion of empowerment? Should it be the pharma companies? Should it be the patient organisations? And can you talk a little bit as well about that point at which you step back as a company and kind of let empower the patient groups to run with serving their communities and their patient communities?
So, may I, Natalie? Yeah.
Please, by all means.
So, I mean, to me, this comes back to good old-fashioned segmentation. It's who do we want to empower, and then how do we best empower that user segment, that individual? And one example I'd give is we've learned through relationships with other organizations, primarily in the medical equipment industry, that empowering their staff who are not public-facing, who are not sales-facing, it's very easy to do that when we connect them to the patient journey. Often people are segregated from the patient journey and they're focused on the design, the manufacture, the laboratory work, but making it real for them, bringing it home with a patient story, not statistics, not data, but a human face and a human voice telling them how their vital work has impacted on that individual's life. That's hugely empowering. Now, of course, as a charity, we can be empowered to reach out to the broader public and we can empower that public to change their behavior. But I think we have to understand that this is not as simple as who empowers everybody. This is around whom do we want to empower and what's the best strategy to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just reflect on that and say, absolutely. At the end of the day, this is about the patient. It is about the patient being center. And all of us that sit around that patient, we do what we can and have to be flexible as to who leads, how we appreciate these strategies. And it is that flexibility, that journey that is key, and the ability to respond flexibly. So I don't think there's any one right answer to this or one right person. It really is who is best positioned to deliver what that patient needs, to understand and deliver what the patient needs.
Thank you. And that leads us very nicely to our next example, actually. So really understanding what the patient needs and delivering that. I think, Sarah, coming to you, got a great example there of Not Every Disability is Visible campaign. Can you talk us through that and specifically how you engaged with patients throughout the campaign?
Yeah, so this is a campaign that has been going actually for about 4 years. And the initial proposition was very, very simple. So people with inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and colitis, an invisible condition, often people look quite healthy. They're often young and fit from the outside, but that's not what's going on the inside. And with the condition, easy access to toilets is a given, or should be a given, but in fact it isn't a given, and that's the whole point. And it really impinged on people's quality of life because they felt they couldn't go out, they couldn't enjoy public facilities, and even in their workspaces, for example, they felt to some degree unsafe. So the proposition initially was, let's just make sure that people understand that accessible toilets are for everybody. 9 out of 10 people with a disability do not use a wheelchair, yet all of these loos are symboled by a wheelchair. And actually what we found was that the public had some kind of level of almost policing that space from a good place, because if they saw somebody using those loos who wasn't in a wheelchair, well, why are you doing that? And that kind of added another level of sort of discrimination on our community. So the initial proposition was make sure that people understand that you don't have to be using a wheelchair to need these accessible facilities. And that grew over a couple of years, and it sort of morphed into a campaign that's not just about getting the right symbols on the doors and making people understand. It's also about educating people who are perhaps using, we targeted supermarkets initially, for example. Do the workforce understand that people who need those loos aren't necessarily in wheelchairs, and the condition and what it means to people and how they experience it. And throughout that, that's a very simple thing, but it was driven by our community, who were saying this is a massive issue for us. And of course, treatment and care is really, really important, but in our day-to-day lives, this really simple thing makes an enormous difference. So please get something done about it. So the campaign had been in place, but then a couple of years down the line, we'd worked on it. We can only do so much. Needed a kind of big refresh to keep driving home that message, to expand and amplify. And I think that's when we really started talking to Janssen about that and how we could work together to really amplify the message and to make sure that we'd taken it to places like supermarkets and travel hubs. We'd had, quite a good degree of success, but there were so many other places where this was necessary. So again, working very much with the patient and understanding the stories that really sat behind this campaign, and using those stories and the kind of understanding of the duality of people's lives, in terms of, on the outside I look great, it's all looking good, but actually on the flip side, it's hell. And I need people to understand that. So that kind of theme ran through the campaign that we then developed with Janssen, without whom we wouldn't have had, frankly, the resources to really convey, and the expertise to convey that messaging, which was at the heart of the story. But we needed to have that kind of partnership to develop and to portray that story. And that's when we moved into a new phase of taking that to last year to to restaurants, and which are actually, if all of us know, where do you go to the loo? Quite often you find a kind of a local, chain restaurant, and you pop in there. Well, if we could make them accessible, that would be great. So that was the focus. We had fantastic success with it. 53,000 emails were sent by our community, because that's what we bring. We bring the ground campaign team to CEOs of those chains. And actually, we targeted 15 top restaurant chains, and all of them have responded. 8 have taken on board the signage already, and 7 are looking to do more. But then, of course, Janssen, where are we going next? What can we do next? All fired up. Employment, actually, that's a real issue for people. We start talking about that end of last year, beginning of this year. And what comes down the track but COVID? So actually, at work, that was a bit of a kind of all of our plans thrown up into the air, and the flexibility to change and work in partnership really needed to come to the fore there, because we really had to talk about, okay, it's not going to work in quite the way that we were planning. We need to talk about how we can flex things around. So, the story of the campaign has been quite an interesting story, I think, of a patient charity starting out, doing something little, going on a journey, working with a corporate partner, and working long time and flexing to the needs of the changing environment, but always the patient story at the heart.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a really great example of a partnership that's working really well, and also how important it is to listen to the patients and provide something really simple that makes a huge impact. Amanda, coming to you, can you Tell us a little bit about how you make sure that you're always listening to patients and how that influences your work and your activities.
Yes, I mean, I think first of all, just commenting on what Sarah said, but also a lot of the other people have said as well. It's about that partnership, because it's not transactional, and there's expertise in every partner. And actually, if you can really focus on a tangible goal, and I loved what Ron said as well in terms of that kind of real tangible thing that you want to change in terms of policy, or something you actually want to make a difference on, and you can share that common goal, people do get really fired up, and it doesn't matter where you're operating from. And I'm a huge advocate of partnership, not just with patient organisations, but with the NHS, with academia. I just think it's the way forward. And if you can share that goal and find a common aim and respect and bring together the expertise, even if you're walking in the fog, necessarily know exactly where you're going to end up, or something happens and you have to adapt. If you've got that trust and you've got that partnership approach, then you can really, really do so much. And I mean, I joined Janssen literally 4 months ago, so I can't take any credit at all for anything that Janssen has done. But it has been visceral, actually, just how the patient is really central in the company, and it's from everywhere as well. It's not just the patient engagement managers, it's the medics, it's the commercial team, it's the managing director, it's the European lot that I haven't really got their name of yet. It's really impressive how patient centricity is there. And I think reflecting on how we got there, which is actually your question, I think right back in 2016 we did an audit, and it was born really out of that really recommended that we became better at bringing patients into our decision making, our business planning and our thinking, and we put in place a patient advisory committee that really helped us with our decision making, our thinking, and challenged us as well. And they did this in a number of ways. We had mentoring for our management committee members. We've had, support into the therapy areas that we're working in, thinking about what are the kind of KPIs for the future. And I was looking, we're planning our next kind of virtual conference soon, but I was actually looking at what we did last year or earlier this year, January. And again, I could just see this patient centricity shining through with our meeting, see how much it inspires people and makes them want to get up in the morning to make a difference. I mean, again, I was meant to have a meeting with my team. I haven't met half of them. Well, no, I haven't met 90% of them, to be honest. But actually what we ended up having a virtual thing, and there was questions just like about what inspires you. And I think what inspires me is to make a difference, and the variation in access to healthcare and to facilities and so on is something that really does inspire people. And I think if you can put a structure around it in a company, you can't just go, oh yes, patients, and just keep mentioning patients all the time. You have to work hard at it, and you have to really think about how we're going to enable people who don't have that connection with the patient journey as much to really understand it. And I think that's what it seems to me that Janssen has really done and got a reputation for, actually, in the sense that when I'm recruiting, and I am at the moment, people mention it when they come to work for Janssen, it's because of a lot of that ethos.
How important would you say that the buy-in at the top of the company is to creating that sort of culture?
Oh, I mean, it goes without saying that if you don't have senior leadership at a global and a local country level, then you're always going to be pushing water uphill. And I think Janssen has the credo, which is, I'm used to companies having vision statements. They've got like a really long, essay, but it's really lived and breathed, and people mention it all the time, and I do think it makes a difference to actually have people up front talking about these things, not just in meetings when we've scheduled an agenda on it, but actually in everyday meetings when we're talking about something and it just gets raised without it being an agenda item or something like that. And that to me, well, culture change, I always think you've got culture change when you kind of try and talk about organizations with, you know, messaging and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, to me, what's really interesting is the everyday signs and symptoms of culture change. And, you know, what kind of conversations happen at the coffee machine? If we were at a coffee machine, what kind of things just pop up individually that you can just notice? And for me, the signs and symptoms are always the indicators of whether your vision and your kind of big ambitions are actually being pulled through into what you're doing all the time. So yes, that's my experience of Janssen so far and my understanding of what's happened. Sadly, I can't take the credit for it, but yeah.
There's some really good hints and tips in there, definitely. Moving to Jenny, who was a judge of the index. So we've heard some really, really great examples, some gold standard examples there of partnerships. Can you tell us a bit about, as a judge, what you found surprising about the entries for this year?
I think, well, just picking up actually a lot of the points that have been made today, and I think picking up on Amanda's point as well, I think it didn't surprise me, but what pleasantly surprised me was that, yeah, absolutely right. As soon as we started reading as judges an entry that talked about senior buy-in and how it had been kind of threaded through the culture of the company, I knew, I mean, obviously we did read the rest of the entries, but you knew by the time you got to the end that it was going to be a company that had done, you know, and achieved and had made an impact. And I think that, you know, I'm a former journalist and political advisor, right? So cynicism runs through my veins. And I think that what was so fantastic, and you know, people have talked about impact and innovation, and I've been reflecting on it as I've been listening to everybody, and I think that while I think that innovation can enhance impact, because I think sometimes that means that you get noticed or your message is delivered in a noticeable way. I think what surprised me again was how innovative some companies were being. Having said that, I think there is so much scope for companies to think harder about measurement and impact, because, you know, I feel so passionately about doing patient partnerships right must be a commercial and a business imperative, because, you know, if we get this right, not only obviously from a very practical level, it means, you know, internally you get a seat at the table and you get listened to and you get budget, and it means that you can do projects that frankly mean that, you know, somebody can use a toilet without being called out about it. You know, it means that somebody can get access to the right HIV information. So, you know, and I think an example of that with one of our projects recently was working with a patient group on a gynecological cancer campaign, and we did some kind of frankly deliberately provocative polling and media work around the words that other people use for vagina. Okay, and yes, it got great media coverage, and yes, it was fantastic, and it meant I got to say vagina in lots of client meetings, which I love. But what was absolutely fantastic was that not only did it drive tons of traffic and information for the right people who were worried about things. I was standing at a bus stop and I literally overheard two mums saying, well, what word did you tell your daughter about, you know, the word that you need to use for vagina? And in that moment, I was like, this is it. This is how being innovative, being creative can make an impact. And I think, you know, that's something that we saw with all of the companies who were achieving that kind of gold standard. And just to finish off that point, I think on measurement and you know, maybe what could be done differently in the future, I think that more measurement, so yes, that means policy change, as Ron was talking about, media reach, but behaviour change or education of HCPs. And I think if we start to, and some people are already, but I think more can be done in terms of taking that demonstration of real value seriously, then I think that starts to undercut some of the caution and all the cynicism amongst the public or patients or patient groups themselves. And I think we can start to kind of square off that circle. And I think finally, and you know, at risk, I'm kind of last, aren't I? So I'm going to end up looking like I'm repeating everybody, but it's actually because we're all very knowledgeable. So we're all largely saying the same things, which is fantastic. And I think that, you know, when companies come to us and they say, you know, what do we need to think of first? And I think that I would always go back to these 5 principles, which people have said very eloquently throughout the conference in terms of, you know, are we addressing a genuine need? Are we doing something authentic to us, who we are as a company? How are we going to measure success? Who is leading internally, or what's the buy-in? And then do we have a transparent relationship founded in trust? Because I think, and that last one in particular is where I've seen projects fall down or campaigns fall down, and that actually has a ripple effect across, you know, people in other teams, whether that's medical affairs or compliance or whoever. So I think that last one in particular is really, really important. And I think finally, kind of compliance, and I think Richard Davison was saying it earlier, you know, compliance as a way to unleash, not stifle creativity and innovation, I think being really important, and again, giving patient groups the support that they need to help them through the process.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. And I think that brings us to the end of our session, so we're out of time now. So a huge thank you to all of our panelists for some great hints and tips and really good discussion. And I'm going to hand back over to Jenny to close the meeting.
Thank you, Rachel. So obviously we have packed a lot in today. Thank you. It's been truly stimulating and inspiring, and we've had, and I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, our moderators, to Pharma Times, and of course to my colleagues who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to kind of get this right. I mean, I've made some notes while we've been talking and listening, and I think that the things that have stood out to me is about that shared purpose in getting a partnership right. I love Jess's way of describing what her mum called getting the dirt under our fingers and making sure that comes through and is encouraged in companies. Avoiding mission drift, I think, was one of the key themes. I love what Nicole from Sanofi was talking about in the sense that it's in our DNA and we need to keep that going. Being brilliantly untribal, I think, and opening our minds to new partnerships or new ways of delivering a message or impact. Measuring impact relentlessly, I'll keep on banging on about that, and being brave. And I think that that's one of the really inspiring things that's come out of today, is about being brave with what we want to achieve on behalf of patients, and how industry can play a really key role in getting that right. So without further ado, thank you for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. Follow the hashtag. Please get in touch with us if you want to know more, and look out for the insights report that we'll be sending over shortly, which will contain lots of insights and content for you to digest. Thank you very much. Goodbye.